Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're tackling the story of modern capitalism, but not just as some dry economic system. We're going to look at it as a giant, evolving machine, one built on powerful ideas, global power, and, believe it or not, a century of near catastrophic failures. For a long, long time, the gold standard was seen as, well, the golden age of money. It was this symbol of stability, of discipline. It meant money was real, tied to something you could actually hold. But this famous quote, it just perfectly captured the simmering anger of millions who felt totally crushed by how rigid it was. And that's our big question for today. To get the answer, we need to pop the hood on this global financial machine. We're going to see how it was built, why one of the sharpest minds of the 19th century predicted it would blow up, and, this is the most important part, how it actually survived by learning from its own massive mistakes. All right, so let's look at the blueprints. This modern capitalist system wasn't just built out of banks and factories. It was really built on two key things: a revolutionary set of ideas, you can think of that as its software, and a really rigid mechanical structure, which was its hardware. So the system's software, it was this massive psychological revolution that came out of the Protestant Reformation. See, before this, back in medieval Europe, chasing after profit was seen as kind of shady, morally suspicious. But thinkers like Martin Luther and John Calvin completely flipped the script. They reframed work as a divine calling. Suddenly, working hard, being disciplined, and making money weren't just things you had to do. They were signs that you were a good, virtuous person. And this new way of thinking totally unleashed the main engine of capitalism, capital accumulation. The new ideal wasn't to get rich and then, spend it all on fancy stuff. It was to work like crazy, live modestly, and pour the profits right back into the business to create even more wealth. This created this powerful, accelerating cycle that fueled economic growth on a scale the world had just never seen before. Okay, so if that was the software, the system's hardware was the gold standard. This was a global money system where all the major currencies, led by the super-dominant British pound, were tied to a fixed amount of gold. Basically, your paper money was just a claim ticket for a real, physical piece of gold sitting in a vault somewhere. And this created the first huge wave of globalization. With London as the financial center of the universe, it promised stability and trust. Exchange rates were locked in, which made trade predictable, and, maybe most importantly, it put governments in a kind of straitjacket. They couldn't just fire up the printing presses whenever they felt like it, because every single dollar bill was a promise to pay out actual gold. But even as this incredible machine was being built, there was this one philosopher in the 19th century who looked at its internal wiring and basically said, you know what? This thing is designed to blow up. Yeah, Karl Marx. Before his ideas got all tied up in political revolutions, he was really acting more like a doctor diagnosing a sickness. He wasn't just complaining about how tough conditions were, he was arguing that the system itself was fundamentally unstable, that it had these internal tensions that would eventually, inevitably, cause it to collapse. He zeroed in on this core mechanism that he called surplus value. Now, in his view, profit wasn't just some reward for taking a risk. He said it was the difference between the full value a worker produced in a day and the wage they were actually paid for that day. That leftover chunk of value, the surplus, that he said was the source of all profit. And this led Marx to what he saw as the system's fatal flaw. The non-stop drive for more profit forces owners to keep wages as low as possible. But, wait a minute, if the workers can't afford to buy the products that they themselves are making, then the whole system just grinds to a halt. This, he argued, would create this doom loop of crisis after crisis, rising inequality, and eventually total system collapse. And for a while there, it really looked like he was going to be proven right. I mean, look at this timeline. The system was just constantly being rocked by one financial panic after another. It was almost always volatile. And it all led up to the ultimate breakdown, 1929 and the Great Depression. It looked exactly like the final apocalyptic collapse that Marx had predicted. So the Great Depression, that was the system's near-death experience. That should have been the end of the story. But then something completely unexpected happened. The machine didn't just break, it learned. Now remember, Marx's entire theory was built on one huge assumption, that the capitalist system was too rigid, too driven by its own internal logic to ever fix its own fatal flaws. He thought it would just keep becoming more and more unstable until it finally just shattered into a million pieces. But instead of breaking, the system showed off its killer app, radical adaptation. And in what has to be one of the biggest ironies in history, it survived by basically absorbing the warnings of its harshest critics, people like Marx. It started to fix the very problems he insisted would be its undoing. So governments, terrified of a total collapse, stepped in to save the system from itself. They started building in these shock absorbers, things like Social Security for the elderly, unemployment insurance to soften the blow of recessions, new regulations for Wall Street to stop another 1929, and even legal protections for unions to give workers more bargaining power. The goal wasn't to destroy capitalism, but to stop it from destroying itself. And this adaptation wasn't just about social programs. It also included a complete and total redesign of the global financial hardware. The old system was broken beyond repair. So after World War II, the Allied nations got together to build a brand new one from scratch. And at that meeting, the Bretton Woods Conference, the world's financial center of gravity just shifted. The British pound, totally weakened by 2 world wars, was out. The incredibly powerful US dollar was in as the new anchor of the whole system. London's era was officially over. New York's had just begun. So this brings us right up to this system that we're all living with today, an order that was built right on top of the ashes of the old one, where the echoes of that 1944 meeting are still shaping our entire world. But even this redesigned machine had its limits. By 1971, the US couldn't keep its promise to redeem every dollar out there for gold. It just wasn't possible. So President Nixon closed the gold window, basically severing that final link. And ever since then, we've lived in a world of fiat currency. That's money that isn't backed by a physical thing, but by the trust and stability of the government that issues it. And yet, the dollar stayed dominant. Why? Well, it's because of this powerful force called financial inertia. Once the entire world has built its infrastructure, all its trade contracts, its banking systems, its global debt, around a single currency, it becomes incredibly difficult and messy to switch, even if the power behind that currency starts to fade. Now, this slide is really interesting because it gives us a blueprint for how a dominant currency actually fades away. Just look at the dates for the British pound. Its decline wasn't some sudden collapse. It was a slow, grinding transition that took more than 50 years, from the end of World War I all the way to its final humiliating devaluation in 1967. And all of this history leaves us with a pretty provocative thought. The capitalist machine is constantly adapting. Reserve currencies, we know, do not last forever. The pound's era lasted about a century. The dollar's is now approaching 80 years. Its decline showed us the playbook for how these transitions happen, not with a bang, but with a long, slow fade. So the question isn't if the machine will change again, but how. And are we living through the beginning of that change right now?